There is a moment I have lived inside for the rest of my life, and it lasted maybe 4 seconds, and I am going to try to tell you the whole of what was in it, though 4 seconds is not enough time for words, and so the telling will take longer than the thing did, the way a single lightning flash takes longer to describe than to happen. The moment is this. A 7-year-old prince looked up at me in a cold stone corridor and whispered 6 words, and I froze. That is the whole event if you saw it from outside. A guard standing very still by a window while a small boy walked on. Nothing. You would not have looked twice, but I was not outside it. I was inside it, inside those 4 seconds, and what happened inside them changed what I did with the rest of my years. And I have never told it until now, and I am old now, and it is time. Let me put you where I stood first, because the cold of that place is part of it. The cold is in the memory like salt in a wound. The corridor was the long north gallery of the Winter Keep, in Thornwell, the seat of House Varen, where the court went in the hard months because the Winter Keep was easier to hold and warm than the great summer palace. I say easier to warm. It was never warm. The north gallery least of all, it ran along the outer wall, all narrow tall windows down one side looking out on the frozen kitchen gardens, and the stone of it held the cold the way stone does, gave it back at you all day, so that to stand a post in the north gallery in deep winter was a punishment posting, the one they gave you when you'd been slow or sour, and I had been both that month, and so I had the north gallery, 4 hours at a stretch. The cold coming up through my boots from the floor and down off the glass from the windows, the light going gray-blue and thin as the afternoon died. I remember the cold most. I remember my own breath. I remember that I was thinking about nothing, the particular nothing you think about on a long cold post, counting the panes of glass, waiting for the bell, a man-shaped thing standing in a cold hall wishing the hours dead. I was a guard of no importance. I want that clear from the start because it matters to everything. Hollis my name, a guard of House Varen and not a guard of the body, not one of the close watch who stood near the king or the young princes, the trusted ones, the ones who mattered. I was a hall guard, a piece of the furniture of the keep posted to cold corridors to be a presence, a deterrent, a thing in armor that meant the hall was watched. Nobody's confidant, nobody's friend. The royal children would have passed me 1,000 times the way you pass a suit of armor on a stair, not seeing me, not because they were cruel but because that is what I was to them, what I was meant to be, a fixed feature of the stone. In 7 years in that keep the young Prince Wystan had never once spoken to me. I would have told you he did not know my face. I would have been right to think it. Which is the first thing you must hold to understand the size of what happened. That when he stopped, that gray-blue afternoon, and looked up at me, it was the first time in his life he had ever looked at me as a person and not a wall. You learn a strange thing, standing post for years as furniture, and I will tell it to you because it turned out to be the hinge of everything, though I did not know I knew it until that afternoon. You learn that the great house does its truest business in front of the furniture, because we do not count. A lord will say a thing in front of a hall guard he would never say in front of an equal, because the hall guard is not a person to him. He is a fixture, like saying a thing in front of a dog or a door. We see the unsmoothed court, the real faces between the public faces, the grief before it's dressed, the bodies carried out the back ways, the lies in the moment of their making before they've been polished into kindness. A hall guard is the keep's secret keeper without ever being told a single secret. We simply stand in the cold, and the truths happen in front of us because no one remembers we can see. For 7 years I had been the eyes that did not count, the witness that was treated as no witness, and I had thought it was only the loneliness of a dull trade. I did not understand, until a child found me, that being the one who sees and does not count is a terrible kind of power, the power to know the true thing in a house full of comfortable lies, and that such power is worthless, is worse than worthless, is a held coin that helps no one, until the day someone needs the true thing, and you are the only one who has it. He was 7. The younger prince, there was an elder brother, the heir, and Wystan was the second, the spare, the one with less weight on him and less watch, which is a freedom and a loneliness both, and I think now it was the loneliness that brought him to me, though I did not think anything so clear in the moment. He came down the north gallery alone, which was itself a small wrong note, because a prince of 7 does not walk a cold corridor alone. There is always a nurse, an attendant, a tutor, someone, and there was no one. He was alone, small in the big cold hall, walking slowly with his head down, and I noticed the aloneness the way you notice anything on a dull post, as a variation, a thing to look at, and I did not think it meant anything. Children slip their keepers. I thought he'd slipped his keeper. I thought, if I thought anything, that I ought to send word that the second prince was wandering, and I would have in a moment when he'd passed. He did not pass, he stopped. In front of me, looking up, and I looked down at him because you do, and his face. I have spent 40 years trying to find the word for his face, and the nearest I have come is that he looked like someone much older than 7. He looked tired. He looked like a small person carrying a thing too heavy for him, and carrying it alone, and having carried it a long time, and his eyes came up to mine with something in them that I had no preparation for, a kind of testing, a kind of last chance looking. The look of someone who has decided to try one more door and does not expect it to open. And he said, very quietly, so quietly I almost lost it under the wind in the window frames, 6 words. No one would ever believe me. That was all. He did not say it as a question. He did not say asterisk, will you believe me? He did not ask me anything. He said it the way you say a thing you have already concluded, a fact about the world he had tested and found true. No one would ever believe me, flat, certain, a 7-year-old stating the settled law of his life. And then he kept looking up at me, not waiting for an answer exactly, just looking, the way you look at the last door when you have already turned the handle and felt it locked like all the others. And I froze. I want to tell you what freezing is, really, because people use the word loosely, and what happened to me in that corridor was not loose. It was total. It was 4 seconds in which my body became stone like the walls and my mind went somewhere very fast and very far. I did not move. I did not speak. To the boy I must have looked like exactly what I had always been, a wall, a thing in armor that does not answer, which is the cruelest possible thing I could have shown him in that instant. I understand that now. I showed a child who had just risked everything to speak the very face of the world that had taught him no one would believe him. But I was not being a wall. I was drowning. Because his 6 words had reached into me and pulled up, all at once in a single cold rush, the thing I knew, the thing I had been not thinking about on purpose for 2 months, the thing that I, alone of everyone in that keep, happened to know was true. And I understood in the first of those 4 seconds, with a horror that started in my stomach, exactly what the boy was talking about, and that he was right, and that I was the one person in the world who could have told him he was right. And that I was standing frozen and saying nothing, which is to say I was, in that moment, becoming the last and worst of all the adults who would not believe him. 4 seconds. I have heard soldiers say that in the worst moments time stretches, that a thing that takes a heartbeat seems to take an hour, and I had never believed them until that gallery, and now I know they were telling the plain truth, because I lived a long time inside those 4 seconds. I want to try to give you the inside of them, in order, the way they came, because the whole story is really just the inside of those 4 seconds and everything else is explanation. The first second was the falling together. You know the feeling when you have been looking at a thing without seeing it and suddenly it resolves, the way a smear of marks becomes a word. His 6 words hit me, and 2 months of small noted nothings I had filed and forgotten came crashing up into sense at once. The dead nurse, the body at the postern, the new attendant, the lonely boy walking cold halls alone, all of it snapping together into one shape so fast it was almost a sound in my head, a click. And I understood the whole of what he meant before I had finished hearing him, and the understanding went through me cold. The second was the knowing that I knew, not just that he was right, that I, specifically I of all the souls in that keep, was the one holding the proof. That the child had reached, blind in the dark of his disbelief, for one more hand, and had by some terrible accident of fate closed his fingers on the one hand in the whole house that actually held the thing he needed. The improbability of it nearly buckled my knees. Of all the walls, he had stopped at the one wall that knew. The third second was the fear, and I am ashamed of the fear, but I will not leave it out, because leaving out the fear would make me braver than I was, and this is a true telling. In the third second I thought of myself. I thought, it is not your place. I thought, the Queen Mother herself decreed this kindness, and you are a hall guard on a punishment post, and to answer this child truly is to call your betters liars to a prince's face, and that is the kind of thing that ends a man. I thought of the cold season and no posting and winter coming. I felt my whole trained life as furniture pulling at me. The deep old habit of the wall, say nothing. See nothing, it is not yours, let him pass. And for the length of that third second the habit nearly won. The fear and the training nearly held me stone. And that is the second I have had to forgive myself for across 40 years. The second in which I, like all the others, almost chose my own comfort over a child's truth. And the fourth second was his eyes. Because while I stood frozen through the falling together and the knowing and the fear, the boy was still looking up at me, still waiting in that hopeless, not quite hoping way, and in the fourth second I watched the waiting start to end. I watched it begin to leave his face. I will tell you about that in its place, because the fourth second is where the freeze broke and the rest of my life began, but I have to lay down first the thing the 4 seconds dredged up, the thing I knew, or you will not feel the weight that was crashing through me while a child watched a wall fail to answer. Let me tell you what I knew. I have to go back 2 months to tell it, back before the cold gallery, and you'll see why 6 words from a child stopped my heart in my chest. There was a nurse. Mayli's her name. She had kept the young Prince Wystan since he was an infant, not the elder prince. The elder had the grand attendants, the important ones, but Wystan, the second son, had Mayli's, an ordinary woman of no rank, a nurse. And because he was the lesser-watched child, he had been left to her almost entirely. And so she was not really his nurse the way the court meant it, a function, a servant. She was the person who raised him. She was, I came to understand, the whole warm center of that small boy's world. The one who fed him and woke him and sat with him when he was sick and told him the things that the court, busy with the heir, did not trouble to tell the spare. A boy of 7 who is the second son in a great cold house does not have a mother in any way that reaches him daily. He has the woman who is actually there, and for Wystan that was Mayli's, and he loved her the helpless total way a small child loves the one who is there. And Mayli's died. She died in the autumn before the court moved to the winter keep, and she died, this is the thing, this is the whole knot of it. She died badly, suddenly, of a fever that took her in 3 days, and she died in the night, and the court did with it what courts do with an inconvenient grief around a child. They smoothed it. They decided, the people who decide such things, that it would be too hard for the boy, too frightening, the suddenness and the fever and the death in the night, and so they told him a kinder thing. They told him Mayli's had gone away, that she had left to go and care for her own family far off, that she had wanted to stay but had been needed elsewhere, that she was well and happy and far away, and that was all. A clean story. A kind story, they thought. They told him she had gone away, and they took down her things, and they gave him a new attendant, brisk and competent and a stranger, and they considered the matter handled in the way that spares a child. But Wystan knew. That is the part the kind smoothers did not reckon with. He was 7, not 3. He was a watchful, lonely child who missed very little, and he knew. I do not know exactly how he knew. Children know things through cracks adults forget are there. An overheard word, a face that crumpled and recovered too fast, the particular way the new attendant would not meet his eyes when he asked when Mayli's was coming back. He knew Mayli's had not gone away to be happy somewhere. Some true deep part of him knew she was dead, knew it the way you know a thing in your body before your mind will hold it, and he had tried this. I learned later in pieces. He had tried to say so. He had told the new attendant, Maylis didn't go away, something happened to her. And been told kindly, no, she went away, she's well, don't be morbid, don't tell stories. He had told a tutor. Same. He had once gathered himself and told the Queen Mother in the brief formal hour the younger children were brought to her, that he didn't believe Maylis went away, and been gently corrected, told he was a sensitive boy with a strong imagination, told that grief makes us imagine things, told the kind lie again by the highest mouth in his world. Every adult he reached back with the same smooth stone. You are a child, you are imagining. The truth is the comfortable thing we have told you, and your knowing is wrong. Do you see what they did? They did not only lie to him, they taught him that his own true knowing was false. Every time he touched the real thing, she's dead. Something happened. No one will say asterisk. An adult he trusted took his hand off the truth and put it back on the lie and called his reaching for truth a fault in him, a morbidity, an overactive mind. A 7-year-old cannot win that argument. He cannot hold his own true perception against every adult in his world telling him in one voice that he is imagining. So he had done the thing a child does, the only thing left. He had stopped saying it out loud and kept the knowing inside alone, where it sat in him cold and certain and unshareable. Maylis is dead, and no one will tell me, and no one will ever believe that I know. He had concluded at 7, the law of his life as he had tested it. No one would ever believe me. And he had stopped trying. And I knew Maylis was dead. That is why his 6 words stopped my heart. Because I was the one person in that keep who had no reason to smooth it and every reason to know the truth. I had been on the gate watch the night they carried her out. I had seen the body. A hall guard sees the unsmoothed things. We are furniture. They do the real business in front of us because furniture doesn't matter. And I had stood my post the night Maylis died and watched them carry her wrapped form out the postern to be taken to her own people for burial. And I had heard the physician say the word fever. And I had known, in the flat way a guard knows the keep's true business, that the nurse Maylis was dead. It had meant little to me at the time. I did not know the boy. A nurse had died. Nurses die. I noted it the way I noted everything, and let it sink. And 2 months later I was freezing on a cold post in the North Gallery, not thinking about it at all. Until a 7-year-old stopped in front of me and told me the settled law of his life, and every piece fell together in the first of those 4 seconds. That the me and no one would ever believe me was not rhetorical, that he had chosen to say it to me. The wall, the nobody, precisely because I was nobody, because I had no part in the smoothing, because a child who has learned that everyone who matters will lie to him might, in desperation, try the one person who doesn't matter enough to bother lying. And that what he was telling me under the 6 words was the true thing he had not been allowed to say aloud in 2 months. Maylis is dead, isn't she? She didn't go away. I know she didn't. And no one will ever say I'm right. And I knew he was right. I was the one person alive standing in front of him who knew, for a fact, with my own eyes, that the child was right and the whole court was lying. And he had found me. Of all the walls in the keep, the lonely knowing child had stopped in front of the one wall that knew the truth he was carrying alone. And I stood frozen 4 seconds, the truth roaring in me, and said nothing, because the size of it had turned me to stone. Because to answer him was to break with the entire court and tell a grieving child the hard, true thing every adult above me had decided he must not hear. And I was a hall guard, a nobody, and it was not mine to do, and the cold was in my boots. And the wind was in the window frames, and a 7-year-old was looking up at me having tried one last door, and I could feel the 4 seconds running out, and I understood that whatever I did or failed to do in the next breath, the boy would carry it the rest of his life. I have asked myself for 40 years what broke the freeze. I do not fully know. I think it was his eyes starting to drop. That is the thing I remember at the hinge of it, that after the 6 words, after the looking up, when I gave him nothing, not a word, not a flicker, just the stone face of one more adult who would not answer, I saw his eyes begin to lower. begin to give up. Begin to add me to the long count of doors that stayed shut, to fold this last attempt into the law he already knew, see, no one, not even the wall, and turn to walk on, having proved his own sad arithmetic one final time. I saw a 7-year-old begin to accept in the drop of his eyes that he had been right, that no one would ever believe him. And something in me that was older than my rank and my orders and my whole trained habit of being furniture could not let that drop finish. I went down on one knee. The armor was loud in the cold. It is the sound I remember, the clatter and scrape of a hall guard going to one knee on freezing stone, far too loud in that silent gallery, and it put my face level with his, which no adult does. We tower over children without thinking, and I think the simple strangeness of it, the wall kneeling, stopped his eyes from finishing their drop. He looked at me startled now, and I was so far outside anything I had ever done or been permitted to do that I had no plan, no careful words, nothing but the truth and the 4 seconds collapsing into this one. And so I just gave him the truth, low, plain, the way you'd hand a freezing person a coat. "I believe you," I said. "She didn't go away. I know. I'm sorry. You were right." I will not pretend I can describe what those words did to his face, because I have tried for 40 years, and the words for it don't exist. The nearest I can give you is that it was like watching someone set down a weight they'd carried so long they'd forgotten it could be set down, and also like watching someone be struck, because the truth, even the truth you already know, even the truth you've been begging the world to confirm, lands like a blow when it finally comes. And his face did both at once, the relief and the blow, and his eyes filled, and he did not make a sound. He just looked at me, this small boy, with the whole of his lonely 2 months breaking open in his face, and I understood that I had given him the only thing he had actually wanted from any of them, which was not Maylee's back. He was not a fool. He knew she could not come back. What he had wanted was so much smaller and so much larger than that. He had wanted one person to say he was not crazy. One person to say the thing he knew was true. One person to believe him. And of all the people in his world, all the great and trusted ones, it had fallen to a nobody hall guard on a punishment post to be the single human being who would say it. "I believe you. You were right." And I had nearly been too frozen to say it. I had nearly let him walk on into a life believing no one ever would. I knew what it might cost me, even kneeling there. I was contradicting the express decision of the court, the Queen Mother herself. I, a hall guard, was telling a prince a truth his whole household had ordered hidden. This was not a small disobedience. This was the kind of thing that loses a man his post in a cold season with winter coming, or worse. And I found, kneeling on that stone with the boy's eyes filling, that I did not weigh it at all, not because I was brave, but because the weighing had become impossible. You cannot do the arithmetic of your own safety with a child's face doing what his was doing in front of you. The math simply will not run. There is only the child and the truth and the 4 seconds and the kneeling. What I did next was the part that took some courage, because the believing was instinct, but what followed was choice. I did not leave it at "I believe you" and let him carry the truth alone now with one ally, because a child should not have to carry a dead nurse and a lying court alone, even with one kneeling guard who believes him. A child needs the world set right, not just witnessed. So I took it up. Quietly, carefully, in the days after. A hall guard has no standing to march into the Queen Mother's rooms, so I did not. I found the one adult in that keep I judged might listen, an old steward who had known Maylee's, who had a conscience and some weight. And I told him plainly what I had seen at the postern gate, and what the boy had been told, and what it had done to him, that they had taught a grieving child his own true knowing was madness, and called it kindness. And the old steward, I will bless him always, the old steward went gray in the face and understood at once what the smoothing had cost, and he had the standing I lacked, and he carried it up. It was not a clean triumph. The court does not like to be told its kindness was a cruelty, and there were those who defended the lie to the end, who said the boy was too young for truth, who were angry at the hall guard who'd overstepped. But the old steward had weight and a conscience, and he would not let it go. And in the end, the thing that should have been done at the first was done. Late but done. The boy was told, truly and gently and by someone who mattered, that Melis had died, that she had not abandoned him, that she had loved him and been taken by a fever, and that his knowing had been right all along, that he was not morbid, not imagining, not wrong but right, and that the adults had been wrong to hide it. They let him grieve her as dead, which is the only way grief can finish, instead of leaving him to miss forever a woman he'd been told was happily elsewhere. They set his world right. Late. But they set it right because a wall knelt down. I did lose the North Gallery in the end, though not the way I'd feared. The old steward saw to it that my overstep was quietly forgiven, and what I lost was only the punishment posting, moved at last to better halls, which I have always suspected was his doing, a small kindness for the man who told him the hard thing. But that is not what I kept from it. What I kept is the 4 seconds, and what I learned in them, which I have carried now 40 years, and will set down here as the only wisdom a nobody hall guard ever earned. I learned that the cruelest thing you can do to a person is not to hurt them. It is to make them doubt their own true knowing, to take a person who sees a true thing and tell them, gently, kindly, with all the weight of your authority, that they are imagining it, until they stop trusting the one instrument a soul cannot live without, which is their own grip on what is real. They did that to a 7-year-old out of kindness. They very nearly broke something in him that does not mend. And I learned that the remedy for it is so small and so enormous that grown people walk past chances to give it every day without seeing them. That sometimes the whole of what a drowning person needs is 3 words, "I believe you," said by one human being who is willing to break ranks with the comfortable lie and stand with the lonely truth. It costs almost nothing. It is worth almost everything. And it can fall to anyone to give it, to the great, to the trusted, or to a cold nobody on a punishment post who very nearly stayed frozen. He found me again, years later. Prince Wystan grown, a young man by then, and he had become, people remarked on it without knowing why, a notably, unusually kind man, the sort who listened to servants and believed children and could not abide a comfortable lie told to spare someone a true thing. And I have always thought I knew the root of it, that a man who was once disbelieved into near madness, and then at the last door believed, grows up to be a believer of others, a giver of the 3 words. Because he knows from the inside what they are worth. He found me grown, and he did not make a speech of it. He was not a man for speeches. He only took my hand, the gesture I'd once made loud and clumsy on cold stone, going to one knee, and held it a moment, and said the thing back to me that I had said to him, "I remember, and thank you for not walking on," and that was all, and it was everything. They train us to be walls. That is the trade, to stand still, to see everything, to answer nothing, to be furniture in the halls of the great. I was a good wall for years. But I have come to believe that the whole worth of a life standing in cold corridors, the entire reason to put a watching human in armor where a statue would do, is for the one moment when a lonely child stops in front of you and tells you the settled sad law of his life and waits without hope for the wall to answer, and you get to be the thing they did not believe existed. Not a wall, a witness, the one who kneels and says the 3 words and breaks the law of no one. I almost missed it. 4 seconds. I will thank God the rest of my days that I knelt before his eyes finished dropping, and that the last thing a frozen nobody did with his fear was set it down and believe a child.